The email hit my inbox at 7:43 on a Tuesday morning. Subject line, Organizational Restructuring, effective immediately. I opened it, expecting the usual corporate nonsense, maybe a reshuffling of desk assignments or a new reporting hierarchy. But the second paragraph stopped me cold. My project, the one I had built from a half-baked concept on a whiteboard 13 years ago into a revenue engine generating $42 million annually, had been reassigned. The new lead was someone named Topher Kingsley, 24 years old, fresh out of grad school. He'd been with the company for exactly 11 weeks. I read the email 3 times. Then I closed my laptop, stood up from my desk, and walked to the server room. I didn't argue, I didn't storm into anyone's office, I didn't send a furious reply all. I simply opened the administrator console, entered my credentials, the ones only I had, and initiated a controlled rollback of every proprietary integration, custom API bridge, and encrypted data pathway I had personally designed over the last 13 years. It took me about 10 minutes. Then I walked back to my desk, picked up the framed photo of my daughter, placed it in my bag, and sat down. I started counting. I got to about 312 seconds before I heard the footsteps. They were fast, almost running. The CEO's office door flew open so hard it bounced off the wall stopper. Gerald Forsyth, 6'2", custom suit, perpetual tan, came barreling down the hallway like the building was on fire. His face was the color of a ripe tomato. He stopped right in front of my desk, breathing hard, and said 5 words I will never forget. "What did you do to the entire system?" I looked up at him calmly. "I didn't do anything to your system, Gerald. I simply removed mine." If you're new here, this channel shares real stories of workplace loyalty, betrayal, and the moments that change everything. If that sounds like something worth sticking around for, the subscribe button is right there. Now, to understand how I ended up in that moment, calmly watching the most powerful man in the building lose his composure, you need to know who I am and how I got there.
My name is Corinne Bellwater. I am a systems architect, or at least that's what my official title was for the last 9 of my 13 years at Lathrop & Burgess, a mid-size logistics and supply chain solutions company headquartered in Richmond, Virginia. Before the fancy title, I was a junior developer. Before that, I was an intern. And before all of it, I was a girl from Beckley, West Virginia, who learned to code on a secondhand laptop her uncle gave her for Christmas when she was 14. My family wasn't poor. My dad was a high school principal, and my mom ran a small accounting practice out of our living room. We had what we needed, but Beckley is the kind of place that teaches you something money can't buy. It teaches you that people matter, that the janitor's dignity is the same as the doctor's, that when your neighbor's furnace breaks in January, you don't wait for them to ask for help. You just show up with space heaters and soup. I grew up understanding that no matter how far you climb, you never forget what the ground feels like under someone else's feet. That sense of empathy shaped everything about the way I worked. When I joined Lathrop & Burgess in 2010, I was 26 years old and had just finished a master's degree in computer science from Virginia Tech. The company was still running most of its logistics coordination on spreadsheets and phone calls. The tech infrastructure was a patchwork nightmare. Legacy systems that barely talked to each other, data silos everywhere, client information scattered across 3 different platforms, none of which synced properly. I saw it immediately, not just the problems, but the architecture of a solution. Within my first year, I had drafted a proposal for what I called the Coreline Framework. It was a unified integration platform that would connect every piece of the company's supply chain data, from warehouse inventory to shipping manifests to client billing to real-time fleet tracking, into a single, intelligent, self-correcting system. My manager at the time, a man named Leonard Trask, took one look at my proposal and laughed. Not cruelly, he just didn't think it was possible. "Corinne," he said, leaning back in his chair with his coffee, "this would take a team of 20 engineers and a budget of about $4 million. We're a logistics company, not Google." I told him I could build a working prototype in 6 months with no additional budget if he gave me access to the existing server infrastructure and let me work nights and weekends. He stared at me for a long time. Then he shrugged and said, "Knock yourself out."
So I did. For 6 months, I essentially lived at that office. I wrote code until my eyes burned. I mapped out data flows on whiteboards that I photographed because I'd run out of wall space. I taught myself 3 new programming languages because the legacy systems required bridges that didn't exist yet. I built custom APIs from scratch. I designed an encryption protocol specifically for the real-time data exchange between our warehouse sensors and the client-facing dashboard. Nobody asked me to do any of this. Nobody was watching. Nobody cared. I was just a junior developer with an idea and an almost pathological need to see it work. And it did work. When I finally demonstrated the Coreline prototype to Leonard and the department heads, the room went silent. The system could track a shipment from the moment it was packed in a warehouse in Norfolk to the moment it arrived at a distribution center in Chicago, updating the client dashboard in real time, flagging delays before they happened, and automatically rerouting through backup carriers if a primary route went down. It did in seconds what used to take their team hours of phone calls and manual data entry. The VP of Operations, a woman named Audra Pennington, stood up from her chair and said, "How long have you been hiding this?" Within a year, the Coreline framework was fully deployed across the company. Client satisfaction scores went up 31%. Operational errors dropped by more than half. The company landed 3 major contracts specifically because of the system's capabilities. Lathrop and Burgess went from a regional player to a serious national competitor, and the Coreline framework was the reason. I was promoted, then promoted again. By year 5, I was the lead systems architect, managing a small team of 4 engineers who helped me maintain and expand the framework. But here's the thing that matters. I had built Coreline with a very specific philosophy. It was modular, flexible, and powerful. But its core architecture, the part that made everything else possible, ran on proprietary code that I had written personally. The encryption keys, the master integration protocols, the self-correcting algorithms, all of it was built on a foundation that only I fully understood. Not because I was trying to make myself indispensable, at least not at first, but because I was the only one who could. Nobody else had the time, the interest, or, frankly, the ability to go that deep into the system's guts. Over the years, I offered multiple times to document everything. I proposed a comprehensive knowledge transfer program. I asked for budget to hire a dedicated backup engineer who could learn the system inside and out. Every single time, Gerald Forsyth, who became CEO in year 8 of my tenure, shut it down. "We don't need redundancy on a system that works perfectly," he told me once during a budget meeting without even looking up from his phone. "That's what we pay you for, Coreline." Gerald was a different breed from the leaders I'd worked under before. Leonard Trask had been old school, gruff but fair. Audra Pennington was sharp and demanding, but respected expertise. Gerald was a Harvard MBA who came in with a mandate from the board to modernize leadership culture, which apparently meant replacing experienced people with younger, cheaper ones and calling it innovation. In his first 2 years as CEO, Gerald let go of 11 senior employees, people with decades of institutional knowledge. He replaced them with fresh graduates from elite programs, kids with impressive resumes and polished LinkedIn profiles who had never managed a live system under pressure. He called it his New Blood initiative. The rest of us called it something less printable. But he never touched me, at least not at first, because even Gerald, for all his posturing, understood on some level that Coreline was the backbone of the entire company, and I was Coreline. Then Topher Kingsley showed up. Topher was the nephew of one of the board members. He had a master's degree from MIT in something called computational decision sciences, which, as far as I could tell, was a fancy way of saying he could build machine learning models that looked impressive in PowerPoint presentations, but had never been tested against real-world chaos. He was smart, I'll give him that, but he had the confidence of someone who had never been wrong because he'd never been in a situation where being wrong actually cost something. Gerald loved him. Within weeks, Topher was sitting in on executive meetings, offering strategic recommendations about systems he didn't understand, and nodding along enthusiastically whenever Gerald talked about the future of the company. I first realized something was wrong when Topher started asking my team for access to Coraline's back-end documentation. My lead engineer, a brilliant woman named Janelle Okafor, came to my office looking uncomfortable. "He says Gerald authorized it," Janelle told me. "He wants full architectural specs, the integration maps, and the encryption key hierarchy." I felt a cold weight settle in my stomach. Did Gerald authorize it? Janelle shrugged. "Topher says he did. I haven't seen anything in writing." I went to Gerald's office that afternoon. His assistant, a nervous young man named Elliot, told me Gerald was in back-to-back meetings. I waited for 90 minutes. When Gerald finally appeared, he waved me into his office like I was an inconvenience. "Corinne, make it quick. Did you authorize Topher Kingsley to access Coraline's core architecture?" Gerald leaned against his desk and crossed his arms. "I told him to familiarize himself with the system, yes. He's going to be taking on a larger role in our tech strategy going forward." "Gerald, Coraline's core architecture isn't something you familiarize yourself with over a weekend. It took me years to build. If he makes changes without understanding the dependencies—" "Corinne," he cut me off with that tone, the one that says, "I've already decided and this conversation is a courtesy. Topher is extremely capable. I have full confidence in his ability to handle this. I need you to cooperate with the transition." "What transition?" He didn't answer. He just looked at me with that half smile that people use when they think they're being diplomatic, but are actually being dismissive. "We'll talk more about it soon. I've got another meeting." I walked out of his office knowing exactly what was coming. I just didn't know how soon. The email came 12 days later. That Tuesday morning email, the one that stripped 13 years of my work away in 3 paragraphs of corporate language. In alignment with our strategic vision for technological innovation and leadership development, we are pleased to announce that Topher Kingsley will assume the role of lead systems architect and primary administrator of the Coraline framework, effective immediately. Corinne Bellwater will transition to a senior advisory capacity to support this change. Senior advisory capacity. That's corporate speak for sit in a corner and be grateful we're still paying you. I sat at my desk for a long time after reading that email. My hands weren't shaking, my eyes weren't wet. I felt something much colder than anger. I felt clarity. 13 years. I had given this company 13 years of my life. I had missed my daughter Rosie's second-grade play because of a server emergency. I had canceled a vacation to Hilton Head because a client integration went sideways. I had worked through pneumonia, through a divorce, through the kind of bone-deep exhaustion that makes you forget what your own hobbies used to be. And in return, I got a 3-paragraph email reassigning my life's work to a 24-year-old who'd been in the building for less than 3 months. But here's what Gerald didn't know. Here's what nobody knew except me and, to some extent, Janelle, who understood enough to be worried. Coraline didn't run on the company's infrastructure alone. The core framework, the foundational layer that made everything else function, was built on proprietary code that I had developed before I even joined Lathrop and Burgess. I had brought it with me. I had offered it to the company, integrated it into their systems, and maintained it as part of my role, but I had never signed over the intellectual property. I had checked multiple times over the years, especially after Gerald took over. My original employment contract, drafted when the company was still too small and disorganized to have a proper legal department, contained no IP assignment clause for pre-existing work. Coraline's core was mine, legally, unambiguously, mine. I hadn't planned to use that fact as leverage. For 13 years, it was just a technicality, a footnote in my employment history that didn't matter because I had no intention of leaving or being pushed out. But Gerald changed the equation. He took my work and handed it to someone else without so much as a conversation. So I did the only thing that felt right. I took back what was mine. The process was clean, surgical even. I didn't delete anything, I didn't sabotage anything, I didn't plant any malware or time bombs. All I did was deactivate the proprietary core layer, the integration protocols, the encryption bridges, the self-correcting algorithms. That belonged to me. Everything I had built before joining the company, and everything I had developed independently on my own time. The company's data was untouched, their basic systems still functioned, but without my core layer, Coreline was a skeleton. The real-time tracking went dark, the automated rerouting stopped, the client dashboards froze, the self-correcting error protocols flatlined. Everything that made Lathrop and Burgess competitive, everything that justified their contracts, their pricing, their reputation, just stopped. And that's when Gerald came running. "What did you do to the entire system?" I looked at him and I felt no satisfaction, no triumph, just a tired, heavy sadness for what could have been if he'd simply treated me like a human being. "I told you, Gerald, I removed my work, my proprietary code, the code I own, the code that was never assigned to this company because your legal team never bothered to check." His face went through about 4 different colors. "You can't do that. That's our system." "Your system is still there. Every piece of software this company purchased or developed in-house is exactly where you left it. What's gone is everything I built independently and integrated voluntarily. And I have the documentation, the copyright registrations, and the legal counsel to prove it." Gerald's mouth opened and closed twice before he managed to speak. "This is theft. This is sabotage. I'll have legal bury you." "Call them," I said. "I'll wait." He did call them. He called Rhonda Castellano, the head of the company's legal department. Rhonda came down to my floor 20 minutes later looking like she'd aged 5 years in the elevator ride. She had a manila folder in her hand and a look on her face that told me she'd already reviewed the employment contract. "Gerald," she said carefully, "can we speak privately?" They went into the conference room across from my desk. Through the glass walls, I could see Gerald's hands moving wildly. Rhonda kept shaking her head. At one point, Gerald slammed his palm on the table. Rhonda didn't flinch. She just pointed at something in the folder and kept talking. The conversation lasted about 40 minutes. When they came out, Gerald wouldn't look at me. He walked straight back to his office and closed the door. Rhonda came over to my desk and sat down in the chair across from me. She looked exhausted. "Corinne, you're right. Legally, you're completely right. The original contract has no IP assignment clause covering pre-existing work or independently developed materials, and I've confirmed that the core Coraline framework is registered under your name with the U.S. Copyright Office. The company has no claim to it." "I know," I said. "But you understand the position this puts us in. We have active contracts with 17 major clients. If those systems don't come back online within 72 hours, we're looking at breach of service agreements totaling somewhere in the range of $60 million in penalties. I understand that completely, Rhonda. That's not my problem. It's Gerald's." She nodded slowly. "What do you want?" That question hung in the air between us. What did I want? I had thought about it during those 10 minutes in the server room. I had thought about it during the 312 seconds before Gerald came running. I had thought about it for weeks, really, ever since Topher started circling my work like a vulture. "I want 3 things," I said. "First, I want a formal licensing agreement for the Coreline core framework, fair market value, independently appraised, with annual licensing fees and a clause that gives me approval rights over any modifications to the core architecture. Second, I want my position restored, not as a senior advisor, as lead systems architect with full authority over the Coreline project. Third, I want a public acknowledgement, in writing, distributed to the entire company and to the board, that the Coreline framework was built on proprietary technology that I developed and own." Rhonda wrote everything down. "And Topher? Topher can stay. He's smart enough to be useful if someone actually teaches him, instead of handing him the keys to a machine he doesn't understand. But he reports to me, and he earns his way up like everyone else. Rhonda took my list to Gerald. I don't know exactly what happened behind that closed door, but I know Rhonda was in there for over 2 hours. I know that at some point, Gerald called 2 board members. I know that Janelle, who had been watching everything unfold from her desk with wide eyes, quietly walked over and placed a cup of coffee in front of me without saying a word. That small gesture almost broke me more than anything Gerald had done. At 4:17 that afternoon, Rhonda came back with a draft agreement. Gerald had accepted all 3 conditions, every single one. The licensing agreement valued the Coreline core at $11.4 million, with annual licensing fees of $1.2 million. My position was restored, effective immediately, and a company-wide memo was drafted acknowledging my ownership and contribution. I signed the agreement at 5:30. By 6:15, I had reactivated the core framework, and Coreline hummed back to life like it had never been touched.
The aftermath was something I hadn't fully prepared for. The company-wide memo went out the next morning. The reactions ranged from stunned silence to quiet applause. Janelle told me later that 3 different department heads stopped by the engineering floor to shake my hand. 2 of them had tears in their eyes, not because of what I did with the system, but because someone had finally stood up to Gerald's way of doing things. Topher, to his credit, came to my office that afternoon. He stood in the doorway for a moment, looking younger than his 24 years, and said, "I didn't know about the IP situation, about any of it. Gerald told me you were being promoted to advisory because you wanted to step back. I should have asked you directly. I'm sorry." I believed him. He wasn't the villain in this story. He was a pawn, a talented kid who got used by a man who saw people as interchangeable parts. I told Topher he was welcome on my team, but he'd start by learning the system from the ground up. No shortcuts, no executive fast-tracking. He agreed without hesitation. Gerald Forsyth lasted another 7 months as CEO. The board, already uneasy about his management style, launched a quiet review after the Coreline incident. They found a pattern: budget cuts that eliminated institutional knowledge, hiring decisions based on connections rather than competence, a culture of dismissal that had driven away some of the company's best people. Gerald was given the option to resign with a modest severance or face a formal vote of no confidence. He chose to resign. His replacement was Audra Pennington, who had left the company 2 years earlier when Gerald had marginalized her role. The board brought her back with a mandate to rebuild. One of her first acts was to meet with me personally. "Corinne," she said, sitting across from me in the same conference room where Gerald had slammed the table, "I need you to know that what happened to you should never have happened, and I need you to know that it won't happen again, not on my watch." I nodded. "I appreciate that, Audra, but I didn't do what I did for an apology. I did it because 13 years of work deserves more than a 3-paragraph email." She smiled. "Yes, it does." It's been 14 months since that Tuesday morning. Coreline is still running. It's better than ever, actually. Topher turned out to be a genuinely good engineer once he stopped trying to impress people and started trying to learn. Janelle got promoted to senior engineer, which she deserved years ago. The team is stronger than it's ever been. I still come in early most mornings, I still write code, I still map data flows on whiteboards and photograph them because old habits die hard, but something is different now. There's a weight that's gone. For 13 years, I carried this company on my back and told myself that loyalty would be enough, that if I just worked hard enough, if I just kept the systems running and the clients happy, the people in charge would see my value and respect it. I was wrong. Loyalty without boundaries isn't loyalty, it's surrender. And the moment I stopped surrendering, the moment I stood up and said, "This is mine and you cannot take it," everything changed. Not because I wanted to burn the building down, but because I finally decided that I was worth more than a footnote in someone else's success story.
Sometimes I think about the girl in Beckley, West Virginia, the one with the secondhand laptop and the big ideas. She would have been terrified of what I did that Tuesday morning. She would have worried about making people angry, about being seen as difficult, about losing the stability she'd worked so hard to build. But I think once the fear passed, she would have been proud, because she taught me something that Gerald Forsyth never understood and probably never will. The people who build the things that matter are not replaceable, and if you forget that, if you treat them like they are, don't be surprised when they remind you. That's not a threat, it's just the truth.